Friends, you are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and this is the daily combat report from the Ukrainian front. Well then, there will be an Easter ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia lasting a day and a half. From the middle of Saturday, that is from 16 Marg on Saturday, until the end of Sunday. The guys will have a day and a half of relative rest, since it is clear that there will be provocations somewhere, and it is clear that this will not apply everywhere. Just like last year. That is, overall on the line of contact it was, well, relatively quiet. But in some places it was not quiet. The same will happen here. In any case, the guys will be able to evacuate someone and feel a little easier than usual. Today there were also supposed to be negotiations between Iran and the USA, but judging by the statements coming from both Trump and the Iranian side, there is every chance that these negotiations simply will not take place. Well, I am recording at lunchtime right now, so it is still unclear, but I would not be surprised if the negotiations do not happen. Because Iran is saying the deal is being derailed, and it really is being derailed because Israel is bombing Lebanon. Trump is complaining that the strait is not open, and that only 7 tankers passed through it in 2 days, while he thought hundreds would go through. That is how things stand. So friends, today's episode will be quite short, because there is not much news from the front. And I will start, as yesterday, with the sector of the East grouping, since I saw many questions in the comments regarding the prospects in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast and the prospects for Zaporizhzhia Oblast, regarding how quickly the Russian army will be able to reach Kharkiv from the east. But you know, I want not so much to tell you as to show you, probably. Just show a clear example so that you understand what the situation is like here and how difficult things have become. The fact is that the number of birds in the sky has increased 3 times. I will emphasize 3 times more than in November or December. I have already told you the reason. Because Ukraine has pulled 40% of all its drone units here. I am in contact with artillery guys who are stationed in the rear. I will of course not indicate the exact position, let us just say in the area of Uspinovka. And the battery commander tells me that they are currently unable to work at all. That is, they do very little artillery work, because the sky is so dirty that it is simply impossible to work with artillery, since you immediately come under attack. Both you and the gun get hit. That is why they are working much less now. But you understand, if the artillery works little, then the offensive potential, of course, drops sharply and dramatically. Can you imagine what is happening at the front line? Somewhere in the area of Berezove or Ternove or Andriivka. The situation is very difficult. Yes, the AFU have run out of steam, specifically in terms of the offensive potential of their infantry. They are no longer mounting those massive assaults like in February and March, but the drone units have not gone anywhere. The number of birds has not decreased. At the same time, I do not want to plunge everyone into depression or paint too gloomy a picture, because if we look to the west, the situation there is already in Russia's favor. Here, the Russian side is quite successfully breaking through the most powerful AFU defensive line, which runs between Vozdvizhenka and Verkhnya Tersa. At the same time, the Russian army managed to wedge itself between these villages and cut the road between the populated areas. In general, look at the AFU defensive line in the area of Verkhnya Tersa and Vozdvizhenka, and what do we see? Well, firstly, they managed to enter Vozdvizhenka and establish themselves in the village. Plus, as I said, they wedged between the villages, cutting the road. Moreover, I have information that Russian forces are even bypassing the village from the west. That is, advancing from the direction of Rozdestvenska, something like this. And essentially right now, the Russian army is simply taking Vozdvizhenka in a pincer, blocking those AFU units that are inside this fortified zone. So the village is doomed, and no matter how hard the AFU cling to this defensive node, they will not hold here. Overall, I assess the prospects here quite optimistically. I am confident that by the end of the month, the AFU resistance in both Vozdvizhenka and Verkhnya Tersa will be broken, and in May, once the green season arrives, they will advance at a good pace toward Lubitske and Nikolske. That is what concerns the East grouping sector. In Rodinske, isolated AFU groups are still located in apartment buildings in the western part of the city. Essentially, once again, that same layered cake. The mine located to the west of the city is still under Ukrainian army control. At the same time, Russian forces from the north and south have taken this territory in a semicircle, almost completely cutting off AFU logistics. AFU groups are still trying to slip from the eastern outskirts of Molodetska toward Udakna along the railway through tree plantations. In Udakna, the zone of control of the Russian armed forces has been expanded to the north and west of the village. In Hryshan, the Russian army has pushed the AFU into the western part of the village, but Ukrainian army groups are still counter-attacking from the direction of Myron, as well as along the highway from the direction of Serhivka. In Myron itself, Russian forces are actively using aviation bombs to attack AFU positions. North of Hryshan, positional fighting is ongoing, as well as artillery and drone crew operations against AFU positions in Novoalexandrivka, Sloviansk-Kramatorsk direction. On the Norsky sector, the Russian armed forces are straightening the front on the approaches to Ry-Oleksandrivka. To the south of the village, the Russian army is repelling counterattacks in the area of Lipivka. To the north, fighting is ongoing on the heights in the area of the Siversky Donets riverbed. To the south of Kaliniki, the grey zone has been expanded. Kiev is trying to prevent the encirclement of Ry-Oleksandrivka, and so is clinging to the forests near Dibrova and sending sabotage and reconnaissance groups into the Siversky Donets marshes. However, the AFU is not in a position to turn the tide of the battle. Russian FPV drones are reaching Ukrainian equipment on the Kramatorsk-Sloviansk highway. Combined strikes are being carried out against the Krasny Lyman area. Fighting is ongoing in the areas of Oleksandrivka and Sviatohirsk. At the same time, the Russian wedge east of Sviatohirsk has cut off the AFU garrison in Tatianivka from supply. Kharkiv direction. The Russian armed forces advanced 400 meters on the Vovchansk sector. There are successes in the forests near Verkhnya Pisarivka. Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups broke through to the western outskirts of Losivka. Small arms fighting is ongoing along the state border in the area of the villages of Zibin, Volokovka, Okrymivka. In Kupiansk, meeting engagements in the northern part of the city. At the same time, a reduction of the AFU bridgehead east of the Oskil River has been recorded. The Russian armed forces are reinforcing positions along the Hanilitsia River in the area of Petropavlivka. Further down the front, Russian forces have advanced significantly toward Kurilivka, although the AFU-controlled Kurilivka 1 neighborhood to the north of the village remains a problem. To the south, the Russian armed forces are approaching the outskirts of Novusinov. In the Sumy border area, the standoff remains on previous lines, with fierce small arms fighting in the area of Novodmitrivka. The Russian armed forces in Kharkiv Oblast destroyed the Yazikovi traction substation, struck the Shevchenkovi substation, as well as a gas complex treatment unit in Buzova. In Sumy Oblast, ammunition depots in Klimentov were destroyed. In Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, a forward deployment base of a ranger brigade was attacked. In Odessa Oblast, an oil depot and substation in Berezivka were attacked. Russian air defense shot down 7 guided aviation bombs and 339 AFU drones over the course of the day. The elimination of an AFU drone center in Pavlohrad has been reported. A missile strike against a secret facility that the Ukrainian army attempted to camouflage. A missile strike was carried out against the industrial zone of Pavlohrad in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. The target was workshop number 4 of the Pavlohrad Technological Equipment Plant, formerly listed as a woodworking sawmill. In reality, the facility was used by AFU drone units for the assembly, retrofitting, and storage of drones. A direct missile hit completely destroyed the workshop, collapsing load-bearing structures and destroying internal equipment and production lines. Secondary detonations recorded confirm the presence of warheads, battery packs, and finished drone aircraft at the facility. As a result of the strike, the AFU drone production and logistics center was eliminated. Stocks of components and finished products were destroyed. Assembly lines and maintenance points were put out of action. Supply chains of drone units were disrupted. With high probability, there are casualties among AFU operator and technical personnel who were at the facility at the time of the attack. The strike directly reduced the intensity of drone use on the line of contact. On the remaining front sectors, unfortunately, there is no news for now. As I said at the very beginning, today's front episode is quite short, because unfortunately advances are not being generous. The pace for now is at March levels. And in March, if you remember the final review I conducted on April 1st, well, the pace was very weak. The Russian army captured 230 square kilometers that month. And in April is also so far quite a weak month. Why? Well, March and April last year were also weak, and the year before that, they were weak too. Probably these are just such months. And of course, there is also the fact that there are more drones in the sky, which means it has become harder to move on the ground, since any movement is immediately detected and a strike is carried out. When the green season arrives, at least the foliage will provide some cover, and it will be possible to advance under the cover of that very greenery. But for now there is no natural cover, which is why advances are coming with great difficulty. Iran has won, Moscow and Beijing are jubilant, the USA and EU are weakening. The China-Iran-Russia axis is frightening the West. A French television channel reports that the 2-week ceasefire at Hormuz revealed a turning point. Tehran's ability to reduce traffic through the strait by 90% over 6 weeks has undermined confidence in American maritime security and threatens half a century of Western energy dominance. The US-Iran talks in Islamabad are taking place against the backdrop of Iran's proven ability to paralyze global supply chains. China, which imports around 70% of its oil, hedged its risks with deals with Tehran and Riyadh, strengthened its mediating role, and is positioning the ceasefire as Iran's success. A prolonged crisis in Hormuz risks triggering a chain reaction in the Red Sea and disrupting logistics along the China-Europe axis. Rising oil prices and a temporary easing of sanctions to stabilize the market provided Russia with additional revenue. As expert Robert Paper notes, the consolidation of Iranian control over Hormuz will accelerate the transition to multipolarity. The China-Iran-Russia bloc, controlling up to 30% of global oil supply, is capable of irreversibly weakening US and EU influence and shifting the global balance of power. And the USA will have to leave NATO when Israel clashes with Turkey in Syria. This was stated by Joe Kent, the recently resigned director of the US Counterterrorism Center, who left due to disagreement with the war against Iran, commented on Trump's statement that NATO did not help the USA. We will leave NATO to stand with Israel when Turkey and Israel ultimately clash in Syria. And this after we helped overthrow the secular Syrian government. It is time to stop playing arsonist and firefighter in the Middle East. It is simply not worth it, he wrote. Zelenskyy is again begging for a meeting with Putin and proposed that the Russian president meet with him, but refused to withdraw troops from Donbas, the media reports. I am ready to meet with Putin. Of course, not in Moscow and not in Kharkiv. But if he is ready to meet with me, there are many places for this. We can find such a place in the Middle East, in Europe, in the USA, anywhere, he said in an interview. At the same time, he refused to discuss the transfer of Donbas, because in his opinion, this would allow Russia to attack Kharkiv and other cities, and a split would emerge in society. Earlier, the media reported that Moscow and Washington are demanding that Ukraine agree to withdraw troops from Donbas. Zelenskyy also whined that Vance and Kushner spent too much time with Putin and therefore trust him. According to him, the Americans believe that Donbas means nothing to Ukraine. The actor tried to prove to Trump's team that Russia is helping Iran strike American bases in the Middle East, but they did not believe him because they trust Putin. Earlier, Trump said that Zelenskyy is the last person from whom he needs help on Iran, and Vance criticized Zelenskyy for attempting to interfere in Hungary's elections. Another blow to Trump in Congress. Democrats are declaring the defeat of the USA in the war with Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Tehran continues to charge money for the passage of ships. American bases in the Middle East are destroyed. Even in the event of a peace agreement, there will be nowhere to return except to rubble. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer intends, immediately after Congress returns from its Easter recess on April 13th, to put to a vote the War Powers Act, which would prohibit Trump from continuing military operations after the 2-week ceasefire. In the lower house, amid unrest among Republicans, the chances of passing such an act are higher than ever. In the Senate, the situation is more complicated. Trump will most likely veto it, but this will be an important signal from Congress. Legislators do not intend to extend Trump's powers. If hostilities continue after 14 days of ceasefire, Trump has the right to conduct them only until the end of April. After that, difficulties will begin. Violation of the law is grounds for impeachment. There is already evidence of depletion of Pentagon arsenals, and Congress is not releasing a new tranche. The overwhelming majority of Americans are in favor of ending the war. In the coming 2 weeks, negotiations on the US side will be managed by J.D. Vance. He has seized the initiative from hawks like Pete Hegseth. Legislators are demanding rapid progress from him in concluding a deal. Vance will then have to report to Congress. In the event of the failure of Vance's mission, congressmen will simply distance themselves from the situation in Iran, leaving Trump alone to deal with the consequences of his failed adventure.